Hello, everyone. It's Wednesday and it's our day with Ricky Williams. And we are starting to have guests on the show. And today we are blessed and grateful to have Celeste Brooks on the show. Now, Celeste, how long have you been an astrologer?
I started my business in 2020, so this is year five.
Wow, you're rocking for year five. Why do I feel like you've got it more figured out than me and Ricky? I don't know. I shouldn't speak
I
for
don't
Ricky.
know. I don't know, but yeah, I've just like submerged my life since the moment I started learning astrology. I came a little later in life in my 40s, and it just explained so much to me. I just couldn't get enough. A true addict. And but I feel like, and I've been told by an Akashic reader, I was an astrologer in a past life, and that it's more like a remembering than anything else. I have Uranus at my IC.
Oh, interesting. Isn't it cool when you're addicted to something you don't have to quit?
Exactly. Yes, it's not fattening. It doesn't cause heart disease or anything.
You just now you
All
just
it,
now you just have a million friends.
I know. Yeah, I've created a whole new network of people that, yeah, it's been just wonderful. I have five planets in the 11th house, so.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Well, okay, so you teach at Kepler, right? What do you teach there?
I teach transits, so a 5-week class about transits. That's part of the diploma program. And yeah, people will learn. It starts on April 1st. So if you want to join, there's discounted pricing till March 18th. So get right on it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, you'll learn all about using progressions, outer planet transits. You learn about retrogrades and stations and eclipses and building a forecast for yourself or your clients. Oh, and synodic cycles. So yeah, it's a lot of material that can
Mm.
help take your astrology level to the next level. Take your astrology to the next level.
Oh, that's so cool. So this show that Ricky and I do is about intersections of race and astrology. Now, have you looked into the intersections of culture and astrology before?
Not so much. I am more of a mundane astrologer, so I'm really interested in worldly events, which race is part of, but it has not been my focus of my work. But I love that you brought this topic up, and it gave me a chance to look at some things. And oh, it's just a perfect timing, like with the George Floyd murder and the resulting protests and whatnot that and we're at a cross between those eclipses and now, so it's a great time
Mm.
to talk about race and astrology right
Nice.
now.
Yeah,
Feels perfect.
interestingly, the Hellenistic astrologers focus a lot on the chart layer, but Claudius Ptolemy, who wrote the Tetrabiblos, we constantly quote his four influences on a growing creature. He would say there's genetics, culture, climate, and the chart. And so we're looking really into that cultural and climate layer of that Ptolemy's analysis. So I think we're really actually rooted in history in this show, and it's we're just kind of highlighting it in the modern day. But Ricky, your teacher, Stephen Forrest, he looks into the cultural layer, right?
Um, he looks at the evolutionary layer, which, I think we're all evolving through culture. So he definitely touches upon it, but it's not really a focus.
Okay.
For me, it's a focus. I think just being an African American male, my whole life has been viewed through that lens. Um, so I think it's just built in. I think I've always been an observer of different cultures. They say race in astrology, but I always like to put gender in there too, because it's something that maybe it's just a layer of common sense that people don't really think about. But if you're looking at an identical chart, but one person is in a male body, one person's in a female body, or different races. uh, I think if you're going to do good astrology, I don't think you can say exactly the same thing to the different people. I think at least in our back of my mind, at least, I'm always thinking of, because I like to point out to people that, in my opinion, a birth chart shouldn't be able to describe an adult because the birth chart is from the time we were born, and that things have happened since the time we were born to modify how the chart expresses. And a lot of those things that have happened since birth have happened in a certain way, a specific way, because of our race and because of our gender, among other things. But those two, I think, jump out because there's so much conditioning around those and they're so obvious.
Yeah, and they're so obvious. It's like it hasn't been a focus for me. Like it's always part of everything. It's like, air has whatever oxygen and
Well,
whatever else in it, and it's just part of the part of the story. So I love how you bring that up, Ricky.
you kind
Yeah.
of triggered me to want to ask a question to you and Celeste because I mean, I hope it's okay to say you guys are both African American astrologers, and it's like you both are readers and read a lot of charts for clients. So, like, what percentage of your clientele is the same culture as you, and what percentage is different?
I would say 60% at least is different.
For me, it's like 85, 90%
Really?
is different. Yeah.
So then, do you feel that you address, for example, people who are different cultures, do you address them differently in the reading than you would if you had like an African American client? Like, is there, like, does that inform the reading? And if so, how? I know we're
For
supposed
me,
to talk about your topic, but I'm just so curious.
no, I think for me, I think each soul is so unique. When someone comes into a reading with me, I look at them as like an amalgamation of all sorts of things, which would include their culture, their gender, their economic status that they were raised in, their education, their this, their that, the da 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 da. So, I think it just all comes in, and I don't really segment it so much in my mind.
Hmm, interesting.
I
Yeah.
think that's the
I mean,
Cancer rising.
I tend to think of, um, in this country, many African Americans are forced to be bicultural. It's like if we
Code
want to,
switching.
exactly. And so I think it's just kind of built in, at least for me to do it. So it's not something that I think about. It's not something that I think about consciously. To me, what jumps out more is if I'm talking to a woman and I see a very powerful Mars, as opposed to when I'm talking to a man and I see a very powerful Mars. To me, that's something that jumps out that I do approach differently based on gender.
Hmm.
And even that approach is based on assumed gender norms for Americans.
Hmm.
I was I did two readings this past week for women from India and different cultural norms, and so I more ask questions, to get a sense of their relationship with Mars. But if it was an African American male, I probably wouldn't ask questions to get context to talk about their Mars. I would assume that I had some that was already somewhat accurate enough to be able to make a connection to them.
Interesting. That's one of the things you brought up that I think is really brilliant that you do. You say that like racism falls away when you start asking questions, because something can become inequitous if you don't know, and then you're speaking as if you know. But if you approach it with a curious, like beginner's mind, then you're not really making an error in many ways. So that's something you've taught us listeners, I feel like, to do is to really ask when you are dealing with a culture that might be new to you. It's just, make sure you ask a lot of questions, which I think is really good. Well, and I
Me
think
too. I have a consultative approach, so I'm not an astrologer who just goes through this is going to happen, this, or whatever. Yeah, like understanding the person to querying how they have expressed their chart to this point helps inform me about where to go next with the discussion.
well, it's interesting because I think if we're being a good astrologer, we do focus in on that chart layer because people come in and be like, well, my mom did this to me, my mom did that to me, and that's the cultural layer and stuff. And we would say, okay, in your childhood this happened, and the chart layer says, well, so we kind of speak back the chart layer over and over again during astrology reading, and in that way we kind of ignore the culture climate layer. And so in some ways we're being great astrologers by ignoring race and culture. I mean, but then also if you ignore it too much, then that's an error. I mean, what do you guys think about that dance, you know?
Well, I wouldn't say ignore it. I think it's to a certain extent it's already built in. And to me, the question asking is to really cover our own backs for based on the assumptions that we make. And I think beyond race and in gender, I think it's really otherness. And what I love about the chart layer is we can go beneath the otherness and spend some time there. But I think to truly connect a person to the actual way the inner layer of the chart is manifesting in their lives, that the chart does manifest through culture and through gender. And I think our ability to go back and forth helps people weave the deeper part of themselves in with their external realities.
Beautiful. Do you have any thoughts on that, Celeste?
No, I think that's beautifully put. Yeah. Yeah. I never thought about like segmenting it out in my, but I feel like my mind filters all that stuff. My career I did for 28 years before I became an astrologer was in sales, marketing, and business development. And I have a degree in biology. And so my clients were scientists and from all over the world. So I had to adjust my approach to people based on their language, their this, their that, like their cultural norms. So it's just something that I've learned how to flex throughout my life, that I don't consciously keep it at the front of my mind, but it's something I'm doing all the time. And we call it code switching, when you're with your family versus when you're with your friends versus when you're elsewhere. You learn how to adjust how you behave, what you say, how you use your body based on your audience. That
Yeah.
Leo Aquarius axis.
Yeah, I'm thinking, right, it's not something that I'm sitting and I'm thinking about consciously, but in reflecting on how astrology is taught, that's more where I focus on, because there's certain assumptions that are made, and you kind of have to make these assumptions when you're writing about astrology for a whole lot of people. And it's like anything. For me, being African American, I had to remind myself that these history books, right? These books weren't written with me in mind. And so I'm just sensitive. I'm just sensitive to that, especially in reading certain things. And I come back to Mars because it's an example. And also I think movies are great examples of to point people to see how things tend to manifest. And there's a theme in a movie, and it's in many movies, where it's a female and she gets beat up or something bad happens, and then she learns, that she needs to learn to toughen up, and so she goes and she gets a gun, or she takes martial arts classes, and then when the bad guy comes back, she beats him up. That's a Mars story, but you don't typically see that Mars story told relative to men. With men, someone hurts the person that the man loves, and then he gets his guns because he already knows how to fight, and then he goes and kills everyone. So that's what I mean, is like, as we watch movies or television shows and we see certain themes, just paying attention that from an archetypal or astrological perspective, we can recognize that's Mars or that's Venus, but the way it's portrayed to us, whether it's a man or a woman or different races, it's different.
I love that. Yeah, have you heard of the book Mars in Culture, Mars Passion or Strife? A look into Mars into different cultures. Have you seen that book? That
No,
was
but I need to.
Yeah, that was written by Kenneth Miller, who I don't know if you know Kenneth, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, he and I went to Kepler together, and that was his thesis actually was about Mars in different cultures, and so because he's a Vedic, Western, he straddles Vedic and Western, so he looks into different cultures, and that's an interesting book. So, speaking of the teaching of astrology, do you both feel that African American culture is adequately represented in astrological teaching environments, like at conferences and Kepler? Do you think there's enough representation?
Of
Just African American teacher. Do we have enough teachers to have a critical mass so that, we're just looking at all things race and astrology in here. I'm just curious if you think there's enough.
Well, there could certainly be more, but I know that a lot of the conferences and things try to make sure to have a certain amount of different voices, whether they're based on race or gender or sexuality or what have you.
Yeah. I
But
remember the
yeah,
year
there could
when
be more.
when I was teaching the Portland School of Astrology, there was a year where NORWAC started to focus in on intersections of race and astrology, and they really were trying to make sure that the conference was equally represented, and that was like a push they did was to go out and find people, and I thought that was really cool. So okay.
I don't know. I feel like as I get older, I'm developing more of a, and I'm not proud of it, but I feel like I'm developing more of an age bias. And instead of age bias, I think maybe it's more of an experience bias. And I do believe people have done this in past lives, and at a young age they can have certain grasp. But I think for me, I'll at least say it this way: the more life experiences you have more experiences that allow you to be a better astrologer because you've seen more, and you can take all the things that you've studied and you've observed, and you have more context with which to place them and communicate with someone. And so this experience thing, and I was reading something the other day, and it pointed out there's a book, and they're saying that astrology is supposed to be a self-study, but because until fairly recently, you had to have a certain level of mathematical skill to be able to cast a chart. And so that eliminated a lot of people from being able to look at a chart. But now we have computers, and so more people have access to charts. But if you look at the history of African Americans, I mean, at least the first couple hundred years, we weren't even allowed to learn to read. And so I just think it's the lack of teachers, I think for me, to a certain extent, is about lack of exposure. And also, I'm completely generalizing here, right? But a lot of my African American friends, when I talk to them about astrology, we get past it usually pretty soon, but they have this kind of inner conflict about the Bible and church and the religion and astrology being from the devil. So I think there's just more obstacles in the way, like a lot of things. And as we're having this conversation, I'm an African American, and I have been being more public and open about astrology and that I teach, and inviting people of all different experiences into it, including men. I think one of the things that I will say that I think is fairly rare is that probably 75% of my clients are men. And even if we say men, right, and we can say that there are how many male teachers are at NORWAC, but there's different kinds of men, how many hyper masculine men are teaching astrology classes?
Yeah.
Are there enough of them?
Well, a few comments there. One is my teacher, Judith Hill. I mean, I had a lot of teachers because I went to Kepler, but I would say my mentor, Judith Hill, talks a lot about that, about the age of 40 is the age of spiritual wisdom and development. And so an astrologer under 40 is kind of a noob, you know what I mean? Where you're just like, oh, you're gonna help me with my life, really? Like you're 23, But like, so I definitely would hear what you're saying about the age thing is I do think astrologers get better with age like a fine wine, Like when I'm 70, I'll be like a way better astrologer than I am now. It wasn't until I was after older 40 that anyone even started to listen to anything I had to say, thankfully. So I agree with you. And then I never thought about the religious block there, but 'cause you and I have talked about how there's so many African American churches, and so which is a strength of that of your culture or the culture there. And but there is that bias that we are false prophets and all that kind of stuff. So those are good points.
Yeah,
Which
that was
I
an inner conflict with me when I first started, that I wasn't expecting to come up because I was raised in the Baptist church. And although I don't remember any conversation about astrology at church, there is this, yeah, bias against it because they don't want you to take any wisdom from yourself. You're supposed to just listen to what the pastor, the priest, the reverend says so that they can have control over your thoughts and actions and whatnot. Yeah. Or that you only get the wisdom of God through a person outside of yourself,
Hmm.
as though you don't have access to that wisdom within yourself. Hmm.
I mean, do
yeah,
you think that it would be beneficial to change that and
If
have
you
well,
think they're letting go of their power voluntarily, I can tell you they're not.
I think it would take a concerted effort, but I think there's a way to modify the astrological teachings to mesh more with Christianity or more with religion. Um, but again, I think that would take an effort to do. And I think if we were sitting here and saying, it's our mission to get more diversity into astrology, I think you would have to put together a way to adapt astrology to different populations.
interesting. I
Because what
look,
I find with astrology is most people that come to astrology um, for a reading or want to learn astrology is because something really challenging has happened that they don't understand. And they've been looking and looking, and they were even open enough to look at astrology, and someone touched them with something that helped them make sense of something that didn't make sense before.
I like that you bring up hypermasculine males because that is a subset of culture that we really don't see a lot. And I've been referring a lot of hypermasculine males to you because it's like they need a sensei or they need, are they going to listen to me? I'm 5'6" and I'm a tiny, I don't know, but I do think a lot of those males can be really helped by knowing that chart layer, especially if they have violence issues or toxic masculinity or what have you. So, um, well,
I mean,
Celeste,
I'm biased, but I think astrology it can be extremely healing for toxic masculinity. It's like,
oh,
and
100%.
and it definitely was for me. So I could see it for being so for a lot of other guys.
All right. Well, okay. Well, thanks for ad-libbing that first half hour, Celeste. We were just trying to get to know you a little bit. So, okay, Celeste has something for us, Ricky. She wants to talk about the astrology of the 40 acres and a mule promise. Okay, so why don't you tell us, Celeste, what that promise is exactly?
Yes. So, and the reason this came up as a topic when you asked me what topic I wanted to talk about is because when you reached out, it was right after the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl in 2025 featured Kendrick Lamar, who is a rapper who's won the Pulitzer Prize. His lyrics are very introspective and talking about culture. And he brought up in the performance 40 acres and a mule, and some of the conversation after that was a lot of people, especially Caucasian people, white people, whatever you want to call, didn't even know what it was. So let me share my screen. So it was like educating people about this important aspect of American culture. And we're getting ready to go back into a similar energy of the time. And so let me give you I didn't put it on here, but let me give you people the date if they want to. It's January 16th, 1865. I just used 12 a.m. I mean, excuse me, noon, because we don't know the exact time it was signed in Savannah, Georgia. But there were these, after the Civil War, as it was wrapping up, there were these special field orders from General Sherman that was intended to right some of the wrongs of slavery. And the promise that was made but not kept was to give 40 acres and a mule to each freed slave so that they would have their own land and a way to make up for what their stolen labor in slavery. So this was the promise, but do you want me to talk about the chart or just?
Well, Ricky, have you heard about this before? I mean, you watched the Super Bowl, right?
No, I didn't. But yeah, but I know what 40 acres in the mule are. Yeah.
Okay.
I think most African Americans have heard of it because it was a promise made but not kept. And it would have made a big difference in terms of, this is generational wealth when you have land that can be passed down amongst families that was,
Yes.
taken away. And it's had
And
an impact on it was a form of reparations after slavery that was not kept as a promise.
yeah, like I looked it up and it sounds like that it's important because, it highlights current system inequities that because of this, there are still inequities economically between cultures. Is that kind of the and that perhaps, there should be reparations around this still because of the inequities that exist.
Yeah, and you can think about it. The land was supposed to come from former plantations, and it was supposed to be settled by free blacks, and it would be protected.
So they just
Yeah, and
didn't
they
give
were
it,
going
they
to
just
get,
didn't give it to them. They were just like, yeah, just kidding, or what? I mean,
yeah, it was reversed by Jackson, or
okay.
what have you, and it was never fully. Let me see. Let's see. Here's what happens. Yeah, after Abraham, not Jackson, Johnson, excuse me. After Lincoln was assassinated, his successor revoked the order.
Oh, so Lincoln passed the order, or who?
He would, well, it was signed by Sherman,
Okay.
but it was intended to become the law of the land. But and it was an order that was passed, but because of the assassination of Lincoln, his successor, just like what we're seeing today, our current president like took away so what happened, this just came to me. So the Biden administration had, with the Infrastructure Act, I believe, there was things that farmers today were supposed to be getting in terms of loans or whatever. And the current president, Donald Trump, revoked that. So it was a promise made that was snatched away. We're seeing the same thing today that we saw back then.
Oh, interesting.
Now, it wasn't about slavery today, but it was, there were farmers today were going to be getting access to capital into order to invest. And some of them have signed contracts and made promises based on what was promised by the government. And now they've been told it's just been torn up. So you're out
It
of
makes,
luck.
it makes me think of, not to detract to a different culture in this show, but it makes me think of gay marriage, like how gay marriage passed and then a bunch of people got married and then it was revoked and then people had to get unmarried. It's like, and it kept flip-flopping with the administrations. I mean, is that way out of line to compare the two? Is like one administration's more forgiving and more, liberal, and then the more Republican probably side is the one revoking. And I'm not a
Mhm.
mundane astrologer, so forgive me for
Well, that's like between, progressing, that's like Uranian, Aquarian, moving things forward with more fairness versus Capricornian. No, we've got this hierarchy. Let's keep it this way.
yeah.
Absolutely. Tradition versus evolution.
Okay. Yeah, and it's interesting how the process of that happens, a lot on transits. Like even right now, like Uranus is sextile Saturn by transit. And it's like so there might be like something, and that's a sextile, it's not some crazy, mean transit, but it's like, the Uranus might progress us forward and then Saturn brings us backwards. And like sometimes there's like a dance between those planets that would go back and forth uh, and I mean, there could be something to be said that this is how transitions, earthquakes have to occur is in little spurts. I mean, I'm not trying to make this seem like it's good or right that this happened. I mean, this is horrible that this happened, but it's just interesting how the humans actually evolve systemically. It seems like there's a lot of forward, backward movement. You know what I mean?
Well, especially in the US, because there is that Mars on the in the seventh house in Gemini. So fighting siblings, kind of square Neptune. Like we've
Hmm.
always the people. Gemini is an air sign. Air signs are humane. Have always been divided based on ideologies. We have natal Neptune in the ninth house,
Hmm.
whereas other countries may not have that divided nature baked into the cake like we do.
Yeah. So, Ricky, this is the chart of the actual moment, right, of the signing. Is that true, Celeste? The chart we're looking on the right?
Yes.
Um, I
Well,
noticed
it's not,
something.
it's the day of the signing, but I
Okay.
picked a noon chart.
I mean, I noticed some things, but I had a chance to look before Ricky, so I don't want to like jump the gun. But Ricky, is there anything you want to talk about that you notice in that chart?
I just want to hear more about it.
Okay.
Fascinating. One piece of information that I can add is um so John Wilkes Booth, the man who shot Lincoln, I think there's a speech earlier, a couple of weeks earlier, where Lincoln was talking about giving the freed slaves the right to vote. And John Wilkes Booth said, that'll be the last speech he ever gives. And he followed through. And so Lincoln's vice president, Johnson, was from the South. And so when Lincoln was assassinated, a Southerner came into power, and and then they had to deal with Reconstruction. The other piece about it was because the Southerners were rebels, all of these new laws came in, and it was a completely Northern Congress, and so they didn't really even have a voice. And I think that's part of the backlash. And it goes beyond taking away the 40 acres and a mule. And backlash was the KKK, etc., lynching, etc.
Well, Celeste, I do want to hear you talk about this, although I cannot believe the Pluto South Node conjunction in Taurus, like on the ascendant, is like talk about land. Like Pluto going through Taurus there, it's like everyone's really, if I'm just thinking about how people were built in chi at that time, it's like there's a lot of clenching of the jaws, like who can have what and like how are we gonna feed ourselves? And like it's just like land, land, land is so Taurus, and that's fascinating, you know?
Yeah, it was like the desire was to transform the land. And with the South Node, I look at the South Node as a drain or as can also be about selfless actions or being more helpful. But Pluto and Taurus, taking these resources and Pluto's brutality as well. Slavery is Pluto and Taurus. Your own physical body is not your own, but
Hmm.
is being brutalized for the wealth and the land tilling for someone else. And yeah, doing this kind of death and rebirth of that.
Mm. Well, and it's like
It's so
nowadays
on
we have
the
Uranus going through Taurus, so there is a Taurus shakeup going on currently as well. And I feel like a lot of people who have natal planets in Taurus are very into isms and racism and classism and patriarchy and all this stuff. Just from what I've known personally, I've known Taurus people. I knew someone with a Moon Mars conjunction in Taurus, and she was like so passionate about the isms. I couldn't believe it. And it's like I feel like the Taurus is here to look at the structures and foundations of, because isms are structural, especially if you take the square to Aquarius and you say the theoretics of Taurus would be like, what are the thought structures here, right? Like, so I just feel like anything going through, what I'm learning from this is anything going through Taurus really ignites all those Taurus people to really have to alter structures, and that's stressful. I mean, I,
It gets real fast when things are going through Taurus and Scorpio. The nodes are in those signs. That's
yeah.
when, yeah.
Oh, what was I going to say? It makes me wonder what happened when Pluto left Taurus during this time and went into Gemini. Like, did they get all the land stuff kind of figured out by then? I mean, I not that it's ever been figured out, but was there a push on the land issue through that Pluto and Taurus and then it kind of relaxed? Or I don't know if any of us know that much history, but
I don't have the details about what happened when Pluto went into Gemini. And remember, at this point, they didn't even, Pluto wasn't even in the conscious attention of people if the planet hadn't been discovered.
yeah. Wait, I want to talk more about the chart. I have something, but this is your class, Celeste, so
Okay.
you got a line.
Yeah, so that's a big theme, Pluto, this distribution of resources, this power struggle over that, the literal war between the states. We see Uranus in Gemini, this, upheaval between, the battling brothers. I mean, brothers is often used as a term when we're talking about the North and the South and whatnot. And that's something that jumps out at me. We know that. And Uranus is getting ready to go back into Gemini July 7th. So this trying to awaken people to thinking differently about their fellow man was or when, fellow people was part of this discussion that to stop bondage. And in this trine with Saturn and Libra. So like trying to make these big changes, these big adjustments to people, and Saturn and Libra by the government in charge was doing that in the United States chart. We have Saturn and Libra in the 10th house of the government. So changing, adjusting the structure Saturn to be more progressive Uranus and redistributing some of that wealth with the South Node and Pluto there really feels important. But crisis and decay, the 29th degree of every sign is a degree of crisis and decay. So Saturn trying to express this energy of fairness, Libra, right before it's changing signs, but there's this energy of just barely. I mean, it's got all the energy, but it's getting ready to break apart and dissolve. And you can think about the election we just had. Pluto was at 29 degrees of Capricorn, squaring this Saturn and Libra. And a big part of the election that we just had with Mars and Cancer opposite Pluto and Capricorn, I feel like was trying to claw back. I mean, they stated they want to bring back the women's rights movement, or but also the civil rights movement. The first thing they did was, oh, DEI is gone, and yeah, it's an attempt to do more to claw back the changes that have and advances Black people have made since the Civil War ended.
It's so interesting that Saturn's in Libra because Saturn had been in Libra there for a few years, right? So there had been a push towards equality or equity or something like that because Libra, I think at its highest is more equity. It's not just like equal. It's like, can we get some, so culturally they had been fighting for several years there to get towards an equality place. And like you're saying, it's at that aneretic degree of like we're trying and then, oh, psych. And like, so that kind of, and then the trine to Uranus, like you're saying, is that revolution go go backwards, go forwards kind of thing. So that's interesting. And then the sun and Cap being square the Saturn, it's like that. I can see where it's like a trigger day for a signing of this thing because we're going to say, can we get a rule or policy in place, Capricorn, that really solidifies this equality thing? So, yeah, it got later taken away, but I think the fact that they were trying to sign it into law in this one day is very indicative of that sun and Cap hitting that Saturn in Libra.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. And right now, it's so interesting. This chart has so much connection to what's going on right now. As we're taping this, the Sun and Saturn are conjunct in Pisces.
Well, and that
Yeah,
sun
like,
is on the degree of like when Black Lives Matter happened, that was when Pluto and Saturn were at late Capricorn near that
mhm.
degree. And that's the degree of, isn't that Martin Luther King's birthday as well, that degree? Like,
Uh,
Rick,
oh yeah, nearby. Yeah, he's January. Was he January 15th? I'd
15th,
have to
yeah.
look up his chart.
It's the
yeah.
15th, yeah.
I can look up his chart, actually. I have it in here, I would think.
I'm trying not to talk too much, Ricky.
Oh, no, I'm enjoying it. This is great.
I feel like you guys have really soothing tones of voice and
Oh, yeah.
is kind of like,
Yeah, Martin Luther King is January 15th, and you can see he's got that Pisces symbology too. There were two planets in Pisces and that. Yeah, we can actually put him and 40 acres and a mule together.
dude, that 26 degree is like Black Lives Matter. It's like so, and like for as a color theorist, like I really look at Capricorn as being castor brown. It's the color of brown skin, and people honor that color when the sun's at that degree. It's like finally people are like, oh, we should honor people who are representing the, but it's like their eye can see that color. It's like really cool. That degree is like bananas.
And look at his Chiron on the south node there.
Oh, interesting.
And he was born with Chiron stationing. So, yeah, that was a big story for him about healing these wounds around our value systems in the country and see how his Saturn is exactly opposite the Uranus in this chart almost.
Do you guys think
And
that the Jupiter and Sagittarius in that 40 acres and a mule chart speaks at all to the emergence towards freedom for all people?
absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, that ultimate truth about we're all uh-oh.
Yeah. Ricky learned so much he had to go. No, I don't know.
Well, Mercury stationing retrograde.
Oh yeah.
Retrograde soon. Yeah. The higher truths make me think about Jupiter in Sagittarius.
Yeah, and it just seems like there would be like freedom to move freely and be, everyone like being allowed to move forward in life. It would be under Jupiter and Sag. So it's like I'm not a Monday astrologer, but I can kind of get into like how were people thinking, spiritually at that time. And so do we have a chart of when this was taken away or did it just or repealed?
Oh, I could try to look it up, but I don't know off the top of my head. Let me go to Chat GPT. See
Well,
if
I've
I can
never
find.
seen GPT be
It's
used.
actually a really amazing thing that can help you so much. Like when I write things now, I just put it into Chat GPT and ask them to make it improve it, make it better.
Hmm.
And it'll like or it doesn't change my voice, but it does things. So we're looking at 40 acres and a mule. And let's do when was special order 15 revoked? What date?
We're trying to see if we can get the chart of when it was revoked.
Oh, it just says fall of 1865. Ah. Oh, yeah, May.
Can we look at the fall transit to the
Yes.
retrogradation chart?
So we can look at the eclipse in the fall of 1865. Does that sound good?
Sure. Are you going to Norwalk, Celeste?
Yes, I'm speaking about secondary progressions on Sunday. So hopefully people will still. Okay, so the fall, we would look at, oh, look at this. So one of the things about eclipses for people who are new, there's when eclipses happen about every 6 months, these intensified new moons and full moons, and solar eclipse says start a new story. So if we look at the solar eclipse outside of 40 acres and a mule that was before the fall of 1865, we can see that the south node of
I got
this
it in Taurus too.
proclamation was eclipsed, and it's in Taurus. So it's
Okay.
like, psych, we were just kidding.
They're like, no, we need land. Like we're scared of how are we gonna eat? How are we gonna grow our food? The yeah. Oh my God, that is crazy. Look at all that Taurus.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah,
And this
so
is where
there
the
we
problem
go.
is like the people in power have the transit as well, and so do the people who are not being, undermined in power. They have the same transit too. And it's they're both wanting land at this point, and so those who are in power just get to do whatever they want apparently, and that's why inequities need to be fought against. I mean, um, yeah. So let's talk about the modern day. I mean, like, how can
Oh, I want to say something before we move on. Retrogrades can bring reversals. And when this promise was signed, and Mercury rules promissory notes, according to Rexy Bills, Mercury was sextile Venus and Pisces. So a promise from the government of, this 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 blessing, this compensation coming. And then at the time it was revoked, Saturn is now in a more exact trine with Uranus retrograde. So Uranus was retrograde when it was made, and then it was revoked when Saturn backed it up to that. Classic. But
um,
this is why we don't do things that are important when we don't make deals that are important when Mercury is retrograde, or Venus for that matter. These collaborations can fall apart. And all
Hmm.
these trade wars that the United States is in right now, we're in war against the whole world, apparently, from an economic perspective. But it was
So
a lot
you
of,
don't think retrogradations are part of the cycle of humanity of like how we push and then like, oh, we gotta check it and then push it again. I mean, is there anything good about that cycle, or is it just that is it always negative,
oh, retrogrades are beautiful at times for inner work, for revisiting, reviewing. Every time something goes retrograde, it gives an opportunity to go back and fix things that were, I always find something pops up with that I need to take care of or fix or what have you. Oh, this sentence would have looked better if, especially when Mercury's retrograde, if I wrote it this way. Oh my God, there's an extra space here. So it gives us an opportunity to revisit old things and update them. But they can bring, these revisions, but also reversals or the collapse of things contemplated. It is an affliction, traditionally speaking. A
Interesting.
retrograde is an affliction.
You know what jumps out to me is the most in this chart is the Saturn at the end of Libra.
Mhm.
Because right, especially when I put on my mundane hat, from my perspective with the mundane hat, it's like the energy that was required to abolish slavery. It took a lot, right? It's I think of Pluto and Taurus, and part of the abolitionist movement was highlighting the lives of the Southerners, and highlighting where the wealth was coming from off of the backs of the slaves. So for me, I think Pluto moving through any sign takes things that are buried, hidden under the surface, and brings them to the surface so that they can be dealt with. And then Jupiter moving through Sagittarius, right? It's a good time to think big thoughts, right? Think of godly thoughts, right? We're all brothers and sisters, and I think this push is really what helped. And we barely got over it. It took a bloody war. We barely got over it, and I think Saturn, right? Saturn moving through Libra, and I imagine the higher beings, they see Saturn moving through Libra, and they say, these Americans got 2.5 years to figure this out. Saturn leaves Libra and moves into Scorpio. It's a different vibe. So my sense is when they signed this, that the people who signed it in their hearts, they knew this isn't probably going to stand up. This probably isn't going to last, but let's get it on the books.
Beautiful. Well, we have 2 minutes, and I do have to ask the question, what can we do in the modern day to keep up with the reparations of the 40 acres and a mule? Like, is there anything that can be done to keep repairing things like this that have happened?
Mm. Well, you can support African American businesses. And right now, there are actually a lot of boycotts happening.
Yeah.
Like the February 28th, there was boycotts of like was don't spend anything today. So when you see those things coming up because of what this administration has done um, with DEI and whatnot, and make no mistake, they're wanting to push Black people back down and
Hmm.
remove from anything but probably menial jobs. That's what they think Black people should be doing. So it's important to recognize that. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think of Make America Great Again. What made America great was free labor. So for me, what's coming up is I think a lot of what we're seeing rise to the surface is the unhealed wounds that occurred after slavery, and there was a huge backlash in the South over all of these rules, and I think when Saturn and Uranus interact in any way, right, that there's a chance that either side can be overdone. And a lot of the commentary about Reconstruction in the South is they tried to change too much too fast. And then there was a backlash. And I think of the 8 years that President Obama was in power, right? It that that being woke, the liberals, right? I think they were empowered, but I think they lost sight of the other side. So kind of too much change too fast, and I think a part of what we're seeing is the backlash from that. So to me, the lesson is change is important, right? Uranus is important, but we can't ignore Saturn, right? And I think when Saturn and Uranus are interacting, change, but let's go slow, right? Let's go slow. Haste makes waste. Let's go slow so there's not a big backlash, because the backlash is going to be Iranian. And I think if we just keep swinging back and forth, that's a really slow and tough way to make progress.
Wonderful. Well, I feel like you have one more, but we do need to wrap up, Celeste, but is there another thing you wanted to say?
I just wanted to, with Ricky's comment about the wounds from back then that weren't healed. The United States is in our Chiron return, and we've talked a lot about the Pluto return. You see that everywhere, but Chiron is the original wound, and it's when it comes back every 50 years, approximately, it comes back to where it was in the chart. And we have this reckoning of something that needs to be dealt with. And last year on April 8th, 2024, there was a solar eclipse conjunct Chiron at 19 degrees of Aries. So our Chiron was eclipsed, so kind of lifted up. The wound was pushed up in order to be dealt with. So I definitely really feel that energy of what's going on right now. And it's hard and it hurts. But eventually there will be a reckoning and healing as people wake up when Neptune goes into Aries and the bubble bursts from their, this cult leaders who despite all information, everything you needed to know about Donald Trump was given to you before his election. But people went in a voting booth and said, yeah, that's who I want. And he is systematically destroying the country. He's destroying our economy. I mean, we'll see what's left by the time he's done.
Well,
with his
Celeste, we're gonna have to have you
term.
back on to talk about Neptune and Aries and what we can do for, intersections of race and astrology in the Neptune and Saturn and Aries years. That would be a cool show. You know,
Okay,
I don't know if
yeah.
you'd be willing to come back and talk to us. You were wonderful.
Oh, I'd love to.
Right.
Yes, we could do
Right. Well, thank
it.
you both. It's good to see you, Ricky.
Yeah, it was great to meet you, Celeste. I look
It
forward to
was
next time.
nice to meet you. Are you going to Norway?
I'm not. I don't have any plans to, but
Okay.
I'm a Gemini. I could change my mind tomorrow. So
Well, if you're there, hopefully you'll be at UAC. Aren't you speaking at UAC?
I am. Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll definitely meet then.
All right. Well, I'll see you next week, Ricky.
All
And
right.
see you again soon, Celeste. All right. Bye.